All right, I'm very glad to be talking to Peter Daou on Bad Faith podcast today. Welcome, Peter.
Happy to be here.
So, as many people might know you from having previously been Marianne Williamson's campaign manager, and now in the last week or so, announcing that you are coming on to the Cornel West 2024 team as Cornel West's campaign manager. As you are well aware, there were mixed feelings about that move for a number of reasons. And so I want to get into some of that first before we move into kind of substantively what we can expect from the West 2024 campaign. How does that sound?
Perfect.
All right. So first, a little bit of biography. I know you not from either of those two campaign efforts, but from way back in the golden era of Twitter when we, Peter, were on the opposite sides of the Bernie wars back in 2016. I don't even know if you remember me back then because I was a very small account, but a very active account.
I know. No, we had our run-ins. Brianna, but I'm so glad we're here now.
Yes. So for context, I know a lot of people have been saying things like, well, why should I trust Peter Daou? Because I know him from before. So I think it's worth unpacking what that means. I've seen some other commentators talking about it that haven't necessarily experienced firsthand. And I think some of the, tweets are no longer up. And so I don't want to be speaking obliquely about it. But
right.
As I understand it, you and Tom Watson were part of a group that was known as Hillary Men that were advocating on behalf of Hillary Clinton in 2016 and necessarily against Bernie Sanders in 2016. Yeah. And that is what put us on opposite sides of each other. Can you walk us through how you got involved in Hillary Men and as a supporter of Hillary's campaign in the first place?
Yes. In 2008, I was Hillary Clinton's internet director. Now it would be digital director. And I had worked with the Clinton Global Initiative for some time. And I wasn't with the campaign in 2015 or 16, but at some point in 2015, I felt that the initial mission in 2008, which was to elect the first woman president, and 2015 felt like, okay, maybe there's a chance it didn't work out the first time, maybe we'll do it this time, and I'll just support the campaign from the outside. That was a time when, for many years, I worked within the Democratic Party. Brianna, I just felt that, I think like a lot of Democrats do now, I no longer share these views, that Democrats are marginally better than Republicans, so it's better to elect Democrats than Republicans. That's a fundamental sort of ethical construct around supporting Democrats or the Democratic Party. And I was in that mindset for a while, for quite a while. So during 2015, that was still my point of view. Like, let's elect a Democrat and let's elect the first woman president if that's possible. So, Tom and I have known each other for 20 years, buddies. And, I said, why don't we do this as something where, we can show our support from the campaign, from the outside of the campaign, build some sort of organized structure where we can have, men who want to elect the first woman president, and we will run that effort. We had a bunch of people who came along with us. So that was the genesis of the whole thing. And then at some point in early 2016, a small site called Blue Nation Review was up for sale, and David Brock purchased it and said, Peter, would you like to run it? And I thought, okay, I'll run a small media company, and all the stuff that Tom and I were writing, that sort of pro-Clinton, pro-Hillary content, would go through this, hire writers, and we do this in a very sort of media-oriented way. And it got more and more intense, as you and I know, because we had so many sort of disputes at the time. We were on opposite sides, As you say, by necessity, if I was a Hillary Clinton supporter, I'm a Bernie Sanders opponent. And, it went downhill from there. I'll stop there, but I think we all know how it turned out.
I recommend that people listen to a really excellent interview that you did with Sabby Sabs, and I don't want to retread too much of that territory since she did such an excellent job. But I was thinking of, she asked you about sort of the Bernie Bro narrative, which was so pervasive at the time. And, it was frankly so pervasive that it is literally what inspired me to start freelancing and what led to my journalism career and what led me to the Bernie campaign. And it was pushing back. You told her that you didn't personally engage in the Bernie Bro literal smear, but there was this kind of really identity focused gist of a lot of the pushback, which as a Black woman, I found to be particularly frustrating because so much of it was if you criticize Hillary Clinton, it's because you're a sexist. It's because she's a woman. There wasn't a lot of room for any substantive criticism of her as an individual that could be taken on its face, as opposed to being seen through the lens of identity. And so I wanted to give you an opportunity to speak to perhaps your evolution on how you see identity politics, especially because there was this recent tension between Jamie Dore and Cornel West about the role identity politics should be playing on Cornel West's campaign, and whether Cornel West can accurately be described as doing identity politics if he makes reference to something like white supremacy, for example.
Yeah, I mean, that term itself is so loaded, it would take us an entire show to really unpack what it means. But as I did tell Sabby, and she did a great interview, I thought it was very fair. She gave me room to speak, but she asked some tough questions, and as I know you do as well. I mean, we've spoken before. From my perspective at the time, I did place the representation of women at the forefront of my rationale for doing it. And then when the real battles happened between the Hillary and Bernie camps, there was a sort of focus on, I didn't like the term Bernie bros, but indeed there was a focus on white male supporters of Bernie Sanders being sexist. And I did do that gender-based argument, I did, and I was wrong. The thing I regret the most, though, Brianna, about that is that in that focusing on white male Bernie supporters, exactly what you said is true. Women of color, people of color who supported Bernie, women who supported Bernie were lumped into that. And I was absolutely wrong, and I apologize for that. I was wrong to do that. For years, as you probably know, I've been apologizing for that because it was dismissive of a broader group, even though I didn't like that term or use it. Look, maybe somebody will find one instance where I used it, but I remember openly saying, I don't like this term. It was too, cliched and broad brush, but I did use the gender-based argument. So, whether or not you want to talk about identity politics, I learned it in hindsight, looking back and trying to evolve in my thinking. What I really did is I listened to you and I listened to the critics. I mean, as I've said before, I could have gone a different direction, just doubled down, but I really did try to listen and correct myself rather than just keep lashing out saying, I'm right, you're wrong. And I did that very publicly. I look back and, I was wrong to do that. And I can see how people were offended and angry before, and I understand how the anger has, sort of lasted for years. But I do want to say this, Bree. May I call you Bree or Brianna?
Yeah, of course.
I used to call you Bree, as a friend. All of this stuff, I see the criticisms, and I've seen them for years. These are not criticisms that I did something really ethically untoward. I supported a candidate very vigorously, and a candidate that a lot of leftists don't like, and for good reason, from a policy perspective. So, a lot of it sort of spills out into starting to just hurl these really, I think exaggerated accusations of who I am as a person. I'm a guy who's been a Democrat for a long time. I supported Democrats. I was on the Hillary Clinton side of that particular election. But since then, as you know, I've supported Bernie. And then after Bernie, I've moved much further to the left of Bernie and the squad and others, to the point where I just think the Democratic Party is an utter waste of time. And Dr. West feels the same. So, all of this is really, I've said this, all of this is really, I supported Hillary Clinton as quite a vigorous, and me at times, and I lashed out. And I've apologized for it, for whatever I did to contribute to that.
Yeah, I certainly credit the evolution, and I am not one who, sees that evolution as evidence of your disqualification. Quite to the contrary. As you know, in 2019, when I became aware of you not just having shifted away from kind of mainstream Democratic associations, but very vocally and aggressively pushing back against them and in favor of Bernie Sanders, I was shocked. And I remember the online community being shocked and then being really heartened by it. I was going back through my emails from the time in advance of this conversation today. And I saw, I used to be on like some kind of leftist media group email thread, and someone brought your kind of transformation up, and everybody on that thread, and was a whole range of people that both worked within campaigns and outside and in media and the like, who were all very heartened by it. No one really in that group was suspicious of it. It didn't seem like there was much to gain from that kind of a pivot, and that there was a ton to lose from that kind of a pivot. And so it has been interesting for me, having gone through that realization that, oh, Peter Daou is different all the way back in 2019, to see people online today, especially newer comers to the left media space, struggling with it a little bit more because they're just now meeting the old you at the same time they're meeting the new you.
That's beautifully put, and actually helps me understand, because look, overall, the response to my joining Dr. West campaign has been, for me, overwhelmingly positive, from friends, acquaintances, families, people online, all over the place, media, political figures I know. So it's easy to focus on sort of the negative part of the reaction, although I respect it. I don't want to dismiss anybody, but overwhelmingly, this has been a hugely positive experience for me personally. But it's not really about me, but for Dr. West's campaign, I feel like I've already brought some value. We're really pulling this together, and I'm sure we'll talk about that.
Yeah, I really do want to get into that.
Yeah, I do want to talk, and but just to say that it's true. That's a great point, and that's a great insight. I haven't thought of it. There are people who didn't know me then, didn't know my evolution, and I have to say one thing, that such credit to you, Bree, and Leela, and I respect you so much for this. You were one of the first to embrace this decision on my part to just move towards my critics rather than lash out at them. You had me on the Bernie podcast, and others as well. Some of my harshest critics at the time, people we were just fighting and blocking each other, and have become some of my dearest friends. So there's some negative commentary, and I'm trying to do my best to what I'm trying to do is sort out the factual criticisms, which I take to heart and listen to in a humble way, but also the complete misstatements of who I am, accusations that are completely outlandish. And I think it's important. It's important also for Dr. West and for myself personally to make sure that what's out there in terms of criticism is accurate. Like what you said about using a gender-based argument, that's an accurate criticism. I believe now in hindsight I was wrong about it. There are people, Democrats, who think they're right about it. But do you see what I'm saying? Like, I just really want to separate between factual and made up stuff.
I was trying to go back and find kind of the worst of our exchanges, not to, just wallow in our respective misery like a pig in muck, but to try to make the case for why, like, to the extent that anybody should be distrustful of you or upset with you, it should be me.
Yeah.
I couldn't find it, but at some point I did a PowerPoint presentation back at Harvard Law School, I think in around 2018, 2019, before I joined the Bernie campaign, probably while I was at The Intercept, about identity politics and my argument about how it had been weaponized in the political sphere to the detriment of progressive candidates. And I want to say like at least 20% of that PowerPoint slide presentation was probably your tweets. And I couldn't find it, probably for the best, in advance of this.
Yeah.
But I wanted to bring it up only to demonstrate that they're like, I have cause. That's all I'm saying. I have cause to be frustrated. And then, so when in 2019, we saw this evolution, I was so eager to have you on the Bernie podcast, because I do think sometimes the left doesn't want to own a W. Like, they don't want to take a win. Like, we talk a lot about coalition building, and we talk a lot about having a big tent, and we talk about reaching out to certain kinds of people, oftentimes disaffected conservatives, Bernie to Trump voters, or Obama to Trump voters. And I think that is important. But it does seem to me to be dissonant, to say the least, to have a community of leftists who are very enthusiastically trying to court someone who once voted for Donald Trump, as they should, but then to not want to court someone who once voted for Hillary Clinton.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I hear you. Continue. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Well, that being said, I do want to have a better understanding, though, of what provoked your shift, because unlike your average voter, there is all of this kind of writing and opinion making from you that was concretized online, and so we have a better sense of what you once thought. And to the extent that someone might be suspicious of it, I want to give you a chance to talk in more detail about that journey. So it's not just the kind of dabbling in identity politics, an investment in Hillary as the first woman president over some of her policy choices. It was also some of this kind of Bernie's not a Democrat language. And I wrote an article for Current Affairs at the time that included a quote from you, a couple of your tweets in which you expressed that sentiment, saying that, non-Democrat Bernie Sanders is, hashtag destructive to the party, or that what was it? Since Bernie is, quote, not a Democrat, there was no split in the party, like in response to people who were arguing that there was this division that was happening. So as someone who now is very critical of the Democratic Party, so much so that you don't feel like there's a real path for progressives within the Democratic Party and are choosing to work outside of the party, how did you get from Bernie's not a Democrat to thank God Cornel West isn't a Democrat?
Right. You know, I think it might be helpful to talk about what it's like to get into the system and to be embraced by the system. You know, I think a lot about the squad. You know, because these are mainly women that I respect and have known, some of them personally, some not, and Bernie as well. The system is exceptionally. I want to find just the right words for this, because when I came into it, remember, I've been in the music business, not in politics. It is an extremely heady feeling, Bree, to have someone like John Kerry call you on your cell phone and talk to you and seek your advice. To have Hillary Clinton, you know, invite you to her house and just sit and have dinner and meet her mom and, you know, just hang out and become like part of the family. And it can really change your perception of who you are. And to be really blunt, to be candid, it can go to your head and you can start losing the focus on your principles and values and start feeling like, wow, I can't believe I'm here. For somebody like me who grew up in bomb shelters and who almost died, God knows how many times, there was a certain absolute surrealism to, you know, I was a music guy, and then I started doing anti-war activism against Bush, and I was the anti-Bush guy, and then suddenly I'm sucked into the system. So there's a certain amount of watching what's happening with Bernie and other progressives and seeing that, you know, to them, looking at them, saying, you've got to watch out because you can lose your values. Now, I'm not here to lecture Bernie Sanders. I'm in no position to lecture Bernie Sanders morally, but I can see a process by which it's really enticing to be part of that. And so that was it. You know, it becomes a tribe, and it's the blue versus red. And I'm on the, you know, I'm at the top of the red team here, working with senators and presidential candidates and former presidents. So what happened to me was, and this happened with Obama. I was actually, if you recall, I don't know if you recall, actually, I started my career early with people like Glenn Greenwald and others. It was a small group of bloggers and online commenters. And, you know, I always used to talk to Glenn about criticizing the Democratic Party too. Now, he's gone on his path and I've gone on my path, but there was an intersection at the time. And where I think a lot of us intersected was when Obama and Pelosi and Biden began to just continue the policies of George W. Bush that I had spent so many years opposing, droning weddings, droning civilians. And there's one quote from Rahm Emanuel recommending to Barack Obama, well, we got to do these drone strikes because it makes you look tough. So we're killing civilians to look tough. That type of moral, you know, bankruptcy, frankly, rattled me. And that's why back in 2012, I started talking about you know, supporting Jill Stein. A lot of people were surprised by a tweet that Savvy found that was me promoting Jill Stein in 2012, not after that. So I did have a lot of criticism for the Democratic Party, but, you know, in 2015, 2016, I started this mission in 2008. I thought I'd continue, but once those really, really deep criticisms from people like you and others started, I started thinking, Peter, what are you doing? You know, you're setting aside values you've talked about, and you're accepting this cognitive dissonance of the Democratic Party just for what? To promote one individual, you know? So then I started looking more carefully. This is the process, Bree, that I encourage the path I encourage other Democrats to take. Once you step outside the system, I became an independent. I started asking myself, is Joe Biden better than Donald Trump? You know, was Barack Obama this mystical, amazing figure who just brought, you know, integrity to the White House? You know, I used to sometimes say those types of things, or they brought, you know, integrity to the White House. Looking back and stepping outside the system, my God, the things Democrats have done and the things that their supporters and backers and voters allow them to do. I mean, Barack Obama and Joe Biden built the cages that Donald Trump used to cage migrant children, to split their family. And this is something that a lot of people don't know. Everybody says, well, only Trump, the Democrats will say this, only Trump separated families. But that's not true. The millions of deportations that Obama and Biden conducted, did indeed separate families, rip families apart, send parents away from their children. So this separation, family separation at the border is one thing, but those mass deportations, including under Biden, mass deportation of Haitian immigrants and migrants and asylum seekers. So those are the things, Bree, to answer your question. It's, caging children, bombing other countries, arming the Saudis to bomb Yemeni children. If you have a sense of morals or morality or an ethical code, you cannot continue to say it's okay if blue does it, but it's really bad if red does it. And then, of course, I've talked about the Biden issue. Everybody focuses on Tara Reade, but there are 8 women who came forward accusing Joe Biden of sexual misconduct or harassment or
true.
inappropriate touching. 8.
And Kamala Harris said when those women came forward at the beginning of the campaign, exactly, that she believed them.
Right. So for me, I'm looking at that. I'm thinking this big Me Too movement, you directed at Trump, at Kavanaugh, and others. But it's okay when your presidential candidate, who now is the president and is running it, you just forget about it and you ignore the women. That absolute, I always say, principles applied selectively. Principles applied selectively are not principles at all. If you have moral values, you have to apply them in a nonpartisan way. Whoever does it, you criticize them for it. Whoever does good things, you praise them for it. That's the genesis, Brie. I know it's a long answer, but it's sort of an evolution of I can't accept this cognitive dissonance.
That makes sense. And I think that it's a credit to you that, frankly, that you have moved to the left of many people who are in the Bernie movement. Your willingness to not only support but work for Cornel West is evidence of that, since there are many people in the left media ecosystem and beyond who very much feel like at the end of the day, once we're past the primary, that you should vote blue no matter who.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that the point of dissonance, though, is more around the question of why, it feels like a up, down, up, like Jill Stein, Hillary Clinton, then back to the reset. And I think it's very honest of you to really reckon with the influence that can come, or the how seductive it can be to have a seat at the table and to feel included.
It's power is seductive, and power corrupts people, and power will make you change how you think about yourself. And I was really, I was a Lebanese kid who found myself at the absolute pinnacle of American politics, having conversations with the most powerful people in U.S. politics. And sometimes you do lose yourself. And as long as you find yourself again, that's what matters. And I've said this so many times, Bree. It's hard to describe, and you said this at the top, right? The amount of money I could have made from having 2 presidential campaigns under my belt is astounding. I'm talking about millions of dollars. Do you know how many jobs there are for people with that background and that access to power?
Yeah.
And I did all of it. I just walked away. I have no clue what Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden or the people around Joe Biden do. I know so many of them, and around Barack Obama, I know so many of them. What they think of me, I can guarantee they really dislike me.
I was going to ask if you've had any feedback back in 2019 or now that you've announced that you're going to be working with Cornel West, or even before when you were working with Marianne, if any of them reached out, or if you ever have any exchanges with Tom Watson on the internet or privately.
Not at all. Tom and I have, been in touch on and off, but, we don't really talk that much anymore. And I haven't really heard from any of my establishment friends. Look, I'm blacklisted clearly from working the establishment because of how hard I've gone against the Democratic Party. And there's no doubt about that. So it's not like they come call me and say you're a horrible person, but I'm sure my calls will not be taken by those. I don't care, because I had those years of. So yeah, when you say the up and down, all of us follow uneven trajectories. I know I'm being held sort of accountable for, well, were you this or were you that? But really, all along, I was really a progressive Democrat, then ended up working for more establishment Democrats. But all my work, my consulting work, was for, Amnesty International, Planned Parenthood, groups that would be considered Democrat to progressive, right? Never in my life have I ever voted for a Republican or donated to a Republican or helped a Republican. Arlen Specter approached me. I'm going to give you a little bit of a story here. So Arlen Specter approached me when he was still a Republican to work for him. And, we had a clandestine meeting because I didn't know, because there were some rumblings that he was going to move to the Democratic Party. And I thought, okay, maybe that's what he wants to talk to me. I didn't really know what it was about. And he asked me if I would do digital media for him.
Hmm.
And I said, no, I don't work for Republicans. I work for
Hmm.
Democrats. If you ever switch to the, Democratic Party and, there's an opportunity there, I may give some advice on digital stuff, but I was the blog and digital advisor to the Democratic Party. So much as it's portrayed as this radical shifting from thing to thing to thing, I have always helped progressive Democrats. I was an anti-war activist in the early 2000s, and for a while I worked within the system. And with the Marianne Williamson, opportunity was a just very bluntly, I really thought Marianne would do a dirty break or run as an independent. And I told her this, years ago. I tweeted at her, I'm supporting third parties and indies, but there was an opportunity there. I thought to at least oppose the coronation of Joe Biden by working within that campaign, at least push a platform that I thought was relatively progressive, other than Ukraine. So it's less of a zigzag than I think a lot of people are making, but I absolutely accept that. But Dr. West, the beauty of working with Dr. West is he represents everything I stand for. If you just go to his website and read and his policy platform, of course, will be fleshed out. But if you read the things he stands for, dismantling the empire, Medicare for all, on and on and on, real climate, declaring a climate emergency and true climate action, those are all things I've always believed in and believe in so strongly. So there's a certain consonance here working with him in a harmony that feels beautiful.
So
And
are you,
yeah,
Peter, then
go ahead.
are you confident then? Do you feel kind of doubtless that Marianne Williamson will not do a dirty break, and how much of that realization is a part of why you ultimately chose to leave her campaign?
Well, I don't know. I mean, Marianne and Bobby Kennedy, for that matter, may actually run independent. I mean, Bob Kennedy Jr. is starting to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
I saw something yesterday saying, well, the Democratic Party. So either of them may run independent. I've encouraged them very publicly to run independent because I think it was the right thing for them. And the Democratic Party was never going to have a Democratic primary. We know that.
Yeah.
I, the public reason that I stated that I left Marianne's campaign after a month was my mother's health. And that was indeed the truth. And in fact, unfortunately, my mother's taken a bit of a turn for the worse, and she's held on for a year.
I'm sorry
And
to hear that, Peter.
yeah, thank you, Bree. I mean, she's in her late 80s, and so she's lived a wonderful long life, and I hope she has some more time. She's being treated by doctors, and also my mother-in-law was given a terminal diagnosis. So that's not to say that there weren't problems inside Marianne's campaign, and there were, and they've been written about extensively. But as I've said, I don't trash the people I work for. I don't. I'm a professional campaign, employee or staffer, and so I respect the fact that I've chosen to work for them. So to turn around after I leave and start bad mouthing them, to me shows lack of character. I have publicly criticized Hillary Clinton in the years since I left her, when she's done after Bernie and when she's taken positions I don't agree with. So I have no problem from a policy perspective. Like with Marianne, I disagree on Ukraine, but I don't trash the people I've worked with, neither the staffers, nor the candidates, nor the campaigns, nor the organizations. So there were issues at that campaign. I dealt with them. Was I eager to have her run independent? Absolutely. I've said it to her privately and publicly. I think it's the right thing to do. And that was sort of my thing. Shake up the system. It wasn't, elect a Democrat. And Cornel West wasn't running at the time. So
Yeah, and I certainly have no interest in trashing anyone. I think I've been pretty clear about how I personally have also disagreed with Marianne on some foreign policy issues. I also feel like she's the most progressive candidate in the primary, and I feel like that takes nothing away from a Green Party vote in the general to vote in the primary for the most progressive candidate, which would be Marianne. At the same time, I am curious whether or not you can offer any insight into some of the concerns people had specifically about. There was this accusation that the campaign was not investing in ballot access and some of the core functions that a campaign has to take on in order to really seriously run, as opposed to having a more performative or kind of messaging raise. And people wanted to know how real the campaign was before they would be willing to invest financially in it, for example. And I did ask her about that when she was last on the podcast, but I wonder if you had any further insights.
yeah, I mean, look, from everything I saw, I had known Marianne, but not very well over the years. And so when she approached me, we'd had some interactions over the years. From everything I saw, this was a person who really wanted to win and really wants to win. And nothing I saw Now, that's just me. I don't know her that well,
Hmm.
but in everything that I saw from Marianne Williamson, she was very, very eager to win and, wanted to do better in the polls and, build a campaign. Um, in terms of her interactions with staff, a lot's been written about it, but frankly, Marianne has talked about it. And she
Hmm.
said, I apologize because I've been harsh on staff. So I'm not going to reveal anything by telling
Hmm.
you she's been harsh on staff because she herself has admitted and apologized for it. And so those things are public and have been written out about extensively. I and I'm not doing this to defend or not to defend her. Just my observation was this is a person who's trying to win.
So the stuff
And
about, I think
yeah,
not seeking out ballot
I
access
wasn't there
specifically that.
anymore. Yeah, I wasn't
Okay.
there. I tried to push the ballot access thing early on, but I was only there for 4 weeks. So right
Mm.
away, I noticed that there are infrastructure issues that needed to be addressed immediately, and those were the ones I was addressing. And this happens a lot with my campaign work. I come to a campaign, and there are things that need to be fixed because having if I can, if I may just speak briefly to this idea of who's a good campaign manager.
Please,
When
please do.
yeah, because it's a very specific skill, right? So when Dr. West and I had our initial conversation, we talked about what that means. What is a campaign manager's role? Maybe I would be in an advisory role. We had, as I said, to Savvy, we had one conversation, and then I didn't hear a thing with Dr. West and his wife Anahita, um, who are both amazing people. Very, very, very humble and generous and kind people, but also very politically knowledgeable and highly intelligent. Just like at a different level of intellectual ability for me personally. So, we had that conversation and we talked about what it means to be a campaign manager. So I don't think people recognize it. It's like having been in so many campaigns, especially really big Democratic ones, where the staff in New Hampshire is like 5 times the size of say, one of these smaller, even presidential campaigns. The big campaigns, we're talking about massive offices in every state and, 50, 100 staffers, thousands of volunteers. These are massive operations. We're talking billions of dollars on campaigns. So having been in the war rooms, which is really the heart of the campaign of both the Kerry and the Clinton campaign, where you're really working with the leadership of the campaign. At the Kerry campaign, it was Susan Rice on one side of me, and I'm trying to remember, some of the other people. The most senior people in the campaign are in the war room, and that's where the candidate will spend their time. So I lived in 2 war rooms for 2 years of my life, plus all the congressional work and working on Marianne, and all that experience is basically to say you have to know everybody's job better than everyone on your team. So when
Mm.
I'm having a conversation about NGP Dan or Nation Builder or Action Network or some sort of CRM platform or email platform, I literally have to know all the technology myself so that I can talk to the team. When it comes to volunteer mobilization, when it comes to all the various aspects, fundraising, finance, messaging, communication, social media, is this TikTok video edited properly? And so it's a skill set of knowing every single aspect of the campaign as well, if not better than the team you're leading. And that comes from many years of experience. And then people say, well, you've never won a campaign in your life. Well, I mean, as I said to Staffy, I mean, there are musicians who do amazing albums and never win Grammy for Album of the Year. Winning that ring of the White House, and honestly, Bree, do you think if I had won the White House for either Obama or Trump, the leftist community would be happy working for Cornel? Do they want
Yeah.
David Axelrod to,
I mean, I
and Jim
haven't seen,
Messina to do this?
yeah, I don't think the criticism, I haven't seen at least very much criticism that says he's never
Right.
won a thing before. It's more about the people that you've worked for. But I really do want to second the point that you're making, because I watched it happen even on the Bernie
Mhm.
campaign, how difficult it was to recruit staff because no one wants to be blacklisted for the rest of their career for having worked for a progressive. And that's true of someone like Bernie, who's been caucusing with the Democratic Party for 40 years. And it's certainly mega going to be true for someone who has the audacity to work for a candidate that is fully outside of the two-party system. I mean, this is not abstract. These are not opaque threats. This is back in 2018, after we had that first progressive wave, the Democratic Party promulgating rules that would blacklist vendors for working for any of these progressive candidates. We're saying vendors. If you
Yeah,
built a
absolutely.
stage for a squad member,
Mhm. That's it.
if you
Yeah.
provided food, if you printed T-shirts, like
You'd
you
never
would
work
be
again.
blacklisted.
Yeah,
You'll never, exactly.
absolutely.
And we saw, I mean, I got that exact
Yeah.
invective pointed at me when I declined to endorse Joe Biden after Bernie dropped out. I think it was Tiffany Cross, MSNBC journalist at the time, talking head, who tweeted at me, "You'll never work in this town again." I mean, and that is just a microcosm of what people who dare to cross that line and criticize the Democratic Party experience. So,
it's hardcore. It's hardcore. I've been blacklisted permanently. Won't do media appearances. I used to be on CNN and MSNBC all the time. The minute I went indie, quit the party, and moved left, that was it. Never got another invitation. It's fine. I don't really care.
And that's fine, but it does present some real obstacles for leftists who are running, because even if it's not really even a political position, printing flyers or whatever, you can't get anyone to do it for you, and the expertise really does matter. And I want to say that to credit you, because some people were like, "Well, Brianna, you do it," and I was like, I appreciate the vote of confidence, but it's really not earned. I have very little campaign experience, and certainly not in a kind of managerial role like this. And you guys, those people who might criticize the choice of you as campaign manager, look, I would love to just hear who they have in mind in the alternative, who's actually got the requisite experience. And you would probably agree that if that person existed, you would be happy to step aside for them.
And frankly, if that person exists, maybe they'll become the deputy campaign manager. Yeah. We're looking for talent. And if there are incredible people out there who want to be part of this movement and work for the campaign, absolutely come to me, because this is not just about me. I mean, look, it's not even about Dr. West. It's about the people he has centered his whole life. And I was talking to somebody who knows him very well, who said he has always been like this. He has always been this person since he was a child. He has focused on the people who are basically beaten down by a system that ignores them, that is structured to beat them down. And so for him, it's about the people. And for me, it's about him and the people, that he represents and speaks to and wants to help and uplift. So none of this is about me. In some ways, I feel I really appreciate your question. I really appreciate the opportunity to clarify a lot of this stuff, because it's only in my interest of, not harming him in any way. I personally don't care, Brandon. I've been doing this for 25 years. If you remember the days, well, you're too young to remember this, but, Free Republican Democratic Underground, the sort of early message boards, I was getting death threats 25 years ago from just posting stuff online. I've been doing this so long. I was in a war, This stuff doesn't hurt me personally. To me, it's all about being factual. If you're going to say stuff about me and thus try to harm Cornel West, I'm going to stand up and clear it up, set the record straight. If you're going to just say I'm a horrible, mean person, go for it. I mean, you're free to do that. Let's keep our eyes on the prize, though, which is the people that Dr. West is trying to represent, and an amazing campaign he's building. I was with him in New York a couple of days ago for the climate march. This is my first time actually campaigning with him. It is astounding. This man is astounding. His ability to connect with people. And I've seen the best politicians in the world. He's not a politician, right? But his ability to connect with people running up to him, the loving hugs, the looking at him almost like a father figure, as somebody who's a leader, right? It is something really magical. And to be able to capture that and put it out into the world in a sort of methodical way is really my task, right? To let the world know who he is and the depth of his integrity and his caring for people. That's my job. Not an easy job. There's so many pieces to it.
I think that most folks don't doubt kind of Dr. West's sincerity, his integrity, his commitment to these issues. I do think some people are wondering how, quote unquote, real this campaign is going to be, especially when there is a widely felt sentiment that Bernie Sanders betrayed the hundreds of thousands of people who gave small dollar donations to him in giving up a fight after they had given over this money that was not insubstantial to working class and poor people across the country. And so I think that one of the criticisms that hurt Marianne the most was she's not really being serious. She's not trying to get ballot access criticism. And I do wonder whether or not, what Cornel, how the team is looking at some criticisms about the website not being perhaps as fleshed out, less of a focus on policy in some of the interviews that have been done, and questions about whether or not there really are the resources to ramp up in various states across the country, as is required of a national campaign.
Yeah. Those are excellent questions, and they're legitimate concerns, because the way our system is structured, it's to crush third-party efforts, to not have people who will work for you, to not have people donate to you because they're concerned that they're going to, be spoilers. That spoiler term. A spoiler term is very propaganda term that basically to crush and to chill support for third parties. It's an absolutely meaningless term. You can say Biden is a spoiler for Cornel West. I saw a tweet the other day. Somebody said, Hillary took away Jill Stein's voters and ruined it for her. Right? It's a meaningless thing. People can vote for whoever they vote for, but actually that's not how the system's set up. So in terms of the campaign website, in terms of Dr. West's position, in terms of fleshing that all out, that's all part of the process of what I'm here to do, because there are mechanics to that. Somebody has to do that. You have to, talk to him and sit down, because these are his positions, not somebody's just going to sit and write it. Now, he's represented these things for all his life. So every campaign, including this one, starts from a kernel, and that kernel is the candidate and their values. Everything else is structured around that. You start building out the team. You build a volunteer operation to be able to connect with people who want to help. Thousands of people have signed up for this campaign. And now we're in the process, now that I'm on board, and methodically connecting with them, giving them the materials and the support they need to go out and spread the word across the country. So fleshing out his position is just another piece of it. But what is on the website, actually, if you really read it, though it may be brief, is really, truly, incredibly challenging to the system, to the orthodoxy of the system. We're talking about dismantling the empire. We're talking about, if you actually, I would encourage, I would read it right now, because it's actually incredible to read through it. And I would encourage everybody to go to CornelWest2024.com and just read the initial policy page, which will be fleshed out. We fleshed out our climate policy in the past couple of days. There was a press release that's much more extensive than just the policy page. All these things will be done for you. We will expand. But in terms of how serious the campaign is, one of the things that a reaction to my coming on board has been from a lot of major, I should say, corporate media, major in the sense of size, but corporate media, big media, whatever, mainstream media, whatever you want to call it, has been like a huge influx of inquiries. Because what Dr. West has telegraphed bringing me on board is, this is a serious campaign, and I'm hiring somebody who knows how to do this, and we're building a team that knows how to do this. He is absolutely serious about what he's doing. The campaign is an absolutely serious campaign. We have made what I call an ironclad commitment to go until election day of next year. This is 100%, beyond a serious effort. I think it's a historic effort. A candidate like Dr. West, this is history. What he will be able to do, and what we're going to work to do, is to really break that duopoly.
So no sheep herding. There's a commitment there.
Ironclad commitment is the term we have used. This is look, there have been instances in the past, and Sandy said this to me, and you have said it now, and when you said it, after the two of you said it, it is now resonating what you're saying about how Bernie and the squad and others that people have put their faith and money in have let them down. This is not that. This is not that at all. In fact, by definition, Cornel West deciding to run third party, Green Party, seeking the nomination of the Green Party, is telling you that he's not doing that. He could have run as a Democrat. And
that is true, but also, I got to say, I adore Dr. West, but we have had friendly disagreements on this show about, his choice to vote for Biden in 2020, whether or not it's appropriate for him to be characterizing Trump as a fascist, but not Joe Biden as a fascist, if you definitionally look through their actual behavior and the policies that Biden has continued to support from the Trump era. And, there is, I think, some concern that his kind of warmth and willingness to engage in a explicitly brotherly, right? Brother and sister, this and that, with a wide range of people, creates an opportunity for a sort of sympathy for Biden, an unwillingness to go as hard against Biden as people wanted Bernie to do. And Bernie ended up in this place despite all of his compelling rhetoric over the years, where he was saying, I believe that Biden would be a good president. During the last debate opportunity he had to draw distinctions between himself and the man. So what do you say to people who have those kinds of concerns? Does he have the requisite bite to really go after the Biden Democratic Party?
Well, I don't want to speak for Dr. West, and as a campaign manager, I'm not a policy person. I'm not his representative to speak about what's in his heart and head. But from what I know and what I understand and what I've learned the past week, he most certainly has that bite. He most certainly has the, you know, the principle to know and the willingness to say, because he doesn't mince words. I mean, you've spoke to him a few times. He says exactly what he means. He will absolutely speak the truth. I mean, his slogan, right before I came on board has been truth and justice, right? So, and it's more than a slogan because for him, it's his heart. These are things he has sought his whole life. Now, in terms of, who's the bigger fascist, because I've seen this argument out there. And this is what I mean. By definition, if he's running against a system, he's saying the system itself is never going to serve the people that he wants to serve. So we could sit here and argue, and I've actually done that. Speaking for myself, not speaking for the campaign of Dr. West. You've seen, I've tweeted, there are instances in which Joe Biden has done things that I think are more anti-democratic than what Trump and Republicans have done, and places he is less. But there's no point in comparing the two. The system that they both represent.
I agree. I hate the hierarchy. I hate ranking them. Right. But my question wasn't which is more fascist, but that are they both fascists? That was the question I was putting to him.
Yes, I understand that. From my perspective, a fascist itself, again, it's a specific term. You can use authoritarian. You can use anti-democratic. I don't want to get caught in the weeds because I myself am not an academic or an intellectual. And you can get caught forever. Well, what technically is fascism?
Sure.
Looking back in history. To me, the authoritarian tendencies of Trump and Biden are obvious on their face. Trump, we know, because there's been a lot of coverage. But a lot of the stuff that Biden has done is chilling as far as I'm concerned. And more than anything, for me personally, having grown up in war, the willingness to send cluster bombs, to send depleted uranium weapons, these are exceptionally immoral acts. So whether you want to call it fascism or immorality or whatever, there's a whole penumbra of terms you can use. But fundamentally, this idea that somehow Trump is this existential threat and Biden is this kind uncle who's going to make things better, and that's what Democrats and liberals and mainstream media buy into, is flawed on its face. I see the Democratic leadership and Joe Biden and the Pelosi's of this world as absolutely just as much a threat to whatever we have of a democracy, because for kids in cages there is no democracy. We're saving democracy means nothing to somebody who's being murdered by police in the streets because of the color of their skin. They don't have a democracy. So
or the people who are being charged with terrorism in a 61 count RICO case for handing out flyers and attending a concert at Cop City.
Thank you. So there are so many instances in which there isn't even a democracy to quote unquote save. But on so many levels, and this is where I changed. When I stepped away from the party, it was my willingness to look at this completely, nobody's completely objective, but much more objectively than I've ever looked at it before. And to basically say, I mean, COVID is a perfect example. Under Donald Trump, I don't know, 300,000-400,000 people died. Under Joe Biden tweeted at the time that I think it was 220,000 deaths at the time. Anybody responsible for that should not be president. Well, we're hundreds of thousands of deaths past beyond that. And Joe Biden in early 2021 said, it's over. We declared Independence Day. We were independent of the virus. So far more deaths under Democrats and Biden, even after we had a vaccine. Now, Democrats will go blame Republicans. Well, they're anti-vaxxers. They refuse to. It doesn't matter. It's the leadership. Kids in cages, more oil drilling than Trump. Climate change is an existential threat, and yet Biden and Democrats have been worse than Trump on approving drilling permits. So on so many levels, this notion that Trump is the end of the world if he gets elected, and yet Biden's our great savior, is absolute BS, frankly, Bree. And we're going to shatter that because we're going to speak about it. And Dr. West will speak to that. So there's no, Biden is better than Trump as our basic position. Our position is this entire system has to go, including both of them.
The tension of what it means to run within the Democratic Party when the Democratic Party is continuing so many of these destructive policies, even if they're doing so at a lesser degree. I'm always trying to come up with an analogy, especially in the climate context, because it seems to me that if the world ends, if I, overflow this water bottle that I'm holding, and you're telling me that the Democrats are only going to pour 2 gallons as opposed to the Republicans 10 gallons of water. Well, for those of you who are listening and not watching, this is like a half-liter bottle of water. Either way, we're screwed and the world is ending. And so it's not that is fundamentally why I think so many of these questions about who is worse miss the point. If neither party is going to get us to avoid the climate cutoffs that are going to cause millions of deaths, then neither is sufficient for me. If neither party is going to address the fact that Democrats, through their policy choices, have allowed now the child poverty rate to double after bragging about cutting it into half, that's insufficient for me. There are people that have these existential issues hanging over their head. There are 2 million people in our prison system. There are 68,000 people who died every year of a lack of health care prior to the COVID pandemic. And there is creeping authoritarianism, including that is vetted by and endorsed by so-called Democrats and progressives in Georgia right now around Cobb City and extending all around the country. So I really take that point home. But recently, this was kind of on display as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez participated in a climate march. And I saw many people on the internet listening to her statements about how insufficient the political response is to the crisis, but declining to name names in the way that she did prior to joining the Democratic Party and during times when Republicans are in power.
Right.
And that seems to be really at the core that I see of the issue of continuing to be a Democrat and running as a Democrat. If you are primarily concerned with, or you are so concerned with protecting the image of one's own party, despite your party participating in the very bad acts you're looking to condemn, you are fundamentally neutered. You are fundamentally unable to have an approach that will get to the root of the problem. Right.
Correct. This is the thing, that if you're going to support, and I said this very early on, if you're going to back Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi, who to me are the some of the most sort of egregious protectors of the system, and at every step of their careers, they did their best, and mainly in the past 20 years, to protect the system. Nancy Pelosi was boasting about not impeaching George W. Bush,
right,
and his war and his group of war criminals. These people killed 1 billion Iraqis with a war based on lies, and Democrats went along. So, you made me think of a very, very fundamental thing, Bree, that, why this is such an important moment, this election. If you take a look at the lives of the vast majority, really, of Americans, let alone people in the world, this capitalist system, the system itself, is causing mass suffering, mass misery. Most people don't know how they're going to pay for their next meal. There are people earning $80,000, $100,000 who can't even make ends meet. It's a system fundamentally. This is why I don't identify as an anarchist, because frankly, I don't know enough about anarchism as a philosophy. Again, I'm just
Same.
not. But that's the closest I come of a system. We have to restructure how humans coexist on this earth. So it's so much bigger than Donald. This is why liberals and Democrats are hyper focused on Donald Trump. We got to jail him. If he comes back, the world is over. My God, billions of humans under this capitalist monstrosity are barely able to exist or subsist. So for Dr. West, who has centered the people who are crushed under the system, he is not a capitalist himself, right? I think every other candidate running is capitalist. So where true leftism and independence is really anti-capitalism, anti-imperialism. And that's sort of like a real dividing line. If you're a capitalist, you're not, and again, I don't want to get into who's a leftist, we're not gatekeeping. But from a fundamental perspective, the capitalist system in which humans interact in such a way where humans are just bodies for profit is making life miserable on this planet, is destroying life on this planet. So I'm someone who, in my late 50s, I'm looking to what is a better system of coexistence for humans overall, not is Biden bad or is Trump bad.
I think that's very well put.
You know what I'm saying? Like it's a large systemic.
I think that's very well put. But Peter, that is why it is so frustrating to see some of and I don't want to overstate it, but some of the reaction to you joining the campaign. Like for me, even if you really were just the worst, let's say that you actually didn't.
I was mean. I was not nice.
No. I'm not saying like if you were the worst, because right. Peter. Yeah. I think you were the worst, but I don't think you're now the worst. But even if I thought that you were currently not politically aligned with me in terms of my belief system, there's a part of me that would still credit Cornel West enough in his choice to pick you perhaps for your technical expertise, and given the paucity of alternatives in the field, and given the integrity that Cornel West has shown and his commitment to the principles that you just described, even if you didn't share them, it would not cause me to say something like, well, I'm not voting for Cornel West. I might say I'm not going to donate to Cornel West, right? But that seems to be a leap that, I don't know, smells of some kind of like lack of revolutionary discipline or something to me. It is frustrating that the left is so ephemeral. It is so like quirky. We did a segment on Rising, the one a little viral earlier this week, with Cenk Uygur of Young Turks, and it got a little spicy. And at the end, my libertarian co-host Robbie is like, "Well, if there's one thing Brianna has convinced me of is that there's more division on the left than on the right."
The only thing Brianna has convinced me of on this show is that there is, in fact, more dysfunction on the left than on the right, and today is a good example of that. Thank you very much, Cenk.
That, unfortunately, is true.
And later in that episode, we interviewed the leader of the Libertarian Party, and like it was just so calm. It was just so simple.
But you know what? It's passion. It's passion. I respect it so much. When I say I accept these criticisms with humility and open heart, I truly do. Like I don't read somebody saying, "Oh my God, he's this horrible infiltrator." You're entitled to that opinion. You know, I look at it for the most part I'll explain what I mean for the most part, as individuals who are deeply frustrated by the system, and in many cases, on a very sort of their worldview. You know, we're talking about communists, Marxists, socialists, people who are just completely antithetical to the system. And if they've seen me associated with the system, they have righteous anger against me. I get that. That's fine. Now, I have warned against the fact that sometimes this stuff can be ginned up. You know, there was a lack of clarity. I think I said something to Savvy where I said, I want to address the concerns of principled leftists. I don't want principled leftists to use me as a way to disagree with what Dr. West has spent his whole life fighting for. I'm a campaign operator, and I just put the machinery and the pieces together. But there are also going to be, plans by the DNC. This is what they do. What they're going to want to do is take whatever principled criticism there is and amplify it to make it feel like it's a huge drumbeat. And that's why I'm trying to put it in context. Yes, there are legitimate critics of Dr. West himself, and certainly of bringing me on board, and we welcome that. As Dr. West always says, they will look, they have the right to look, their hearts may open and come along with us, and some will just continue to oppose, and that's their right, and it is what it is. But of course, we are focused on the people that we are serving, which is to uplift the people who are being crushed by the system. But I don't want someone to look at me and say, "Oh, because of you, I'm not going to vote for Dr. West."
Well, that's the thing, because from a strategic perspective,
right?
Look, you can disagree. This is what's bothering me.
Mm-hmm.
There were many during the Bernie campaigns. He took positions that many principled leftists disagreed with, but there was a feeling that what could be gained was so significant that one could kind of vocalize their objections and then still say, well, I'm going to vote for it because of X, Y, and Z. And I'm seeing less of that more. And I felt the same way with Marianne. I had my principled objections to some of her foreign policy takes. Mm-hmm. I have a principled objection to her not, characterizing herself as, a capitalist or whatever those kinds of things are. At the same time that I still believe strategically it makes sense to vote for her in a Democratic primary. I still have the right to vote in a Democratic primary, even if I'm going to vote for Dr. West. And, so what's the harm? But I'm seeing more and more of not just I personally am going to not donate or I'm personally not going to vote. It's like you're not a real, like an effort to hurt others. And even when I was very having a lot of episodes last year about kind of the death of electoral politics and had so many guests on my show that felt really demoralized afterward because myself and my audience just really weren't interested in that project anymore. Right. My approach was never to say, hurt this person's campaign, get in their way, make sure this leftist who's spent all of their personal savings trying to fight the system, even if I don't agree that that's a productive project, I'm not going to hurt somebody. Because what if I'm wrong? Let every flower bloom.
Exactly. And there's also a strange sort of illogic to some of the criticisms, not all of them. And that illogic is, I'm going to stop supporting Cornel West because Peter's going to hurt his campaign. Is not logical. So you're going to hurt his campaign to prevent me from hurting his campaign. That doesn't really make a lot of sense. Yeah. If you think that me or anyone, or, people talk about other potential infiltrators, whatever. Sure, the establishment is going to try all sorts of dirty tricks to stop us. And we're not going to let them stop us because we're going all the way in. But the notion that the correct way to deal with that is to somehow attack Dr. West and his principles. I've said this before. I'm getting to know him. You've probably talked to him as often as I have, if you've interviewed him a number of times. But spending time with him, huddling together quietly and having time to really get to know the man. My God, this human being is an exceptional human being because he's so real. There is no BS with Dr. West. You say something to him, he absorbs it and processes it very quickly and cuts through what's real and what's not, and what's important and what's not. So we're talking about an exceptional candidate and human being. So if you're going to try to harm him using me as a bank shot to prevent me from harming him, I'm confused by all that, Bree, honestly.
Yeah, it does
doesn't
feel
make a lot of sense to me.
Look, if people honestly think that it's a reflection of Dr. West's judgment in hiring you and then therefore don't trust him, they should just say that. But I do think a lot of people are kind of trying to have it both ways, as you're describing, and saying, well, I trust Dr. West, but I think Peter Daou is that. Well, then just own it. If you think it's a lapse in judgment, then make that criticism. But I think a lot of people are reluctant to because he has earned so much respect. And so that's where we are. And just to clarify, it was via Dr. Jill Stein that you came to the Dr. West campaign. Is that right?
Yes. The original meeting that I had with Dr. West, which was, I don't know, maybe a couple months ago now, was through Jill Stein. And I've come to know Jill quite well. And even as a, Hillary 2016 person, it's really quite amazing for me to get to know the person Jill Stein versus the caricature of Jill Stein. She is truly, she is a Harvard-trained doctor, highly accomplished woman, really a beautiful soul, and one of the kindest people that I've met, right? Everybody, this is what's so great about this campaign, Bree. People like Jill, Dr. West, his family, his brother, his wife Anahita, Jill, Chris Hedges, Jamu Baraka. These are people who are, profoundly principled people who have fought the system forever. And I just chuckle at the idea, and not in a dismissive way, not in an insulting way, in a rude way, but it's funny to me to think that Peter Daou is going to come and change all these people's ethics and morals, and yet somehow they're so gullible to be duped by me. It's really it's reaching the point of silliness now. I understand you don't like me because I supported Hillary and I was a very, very aggressive Hillary advocate. I get that. You never have to. I'm not asking anybody to like me, but I am asking people to focus on Dr. West and the people he centers, because otherwise, what are we doing here?
Just quickly, because I know we're running out of time. Who was Jill Stein's campaign manager, and was there any conversation about any people who have been running Green Party campaigns doing this job or working on the West campaign?
I think there were conversations, because when I was approached, the decision had been made that after having that conversation with Dr. West and him having looked into who I am, look, he doesn't hold against people where they've been. He asks them where they are. And he asked me where my heart is. And I told him where my politics are, who I've been, what my history is politically, and where my heart is and my commitment to the movement. And he took me at my word. And we've developed a really wonderful bond. He's a person who really connects. So I don't know who was looked at before. So my answer is I don't know the answer to that. I know I was chosen to do this.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I presume that obviously Jill Stein knows who ran her campaign, and if she suggested you, then that suggests that that's the person she thought was best for the job. I will say to your point about Jill Stein, one of the most remarkable moments I remember from 2016 was that there was my favorite podcast at the time was called Politically Reactive with Hari Kondabalu and W. Kamau Bell. And they used to kind of rag on Jill Stein. And then I think one of their listeners said, you should invite her on because you're not representing her accurately. And after they had her on, they both became Green Party voters in California.
Wow.
So I really do. I think that she's very persuasive and has been really done wrong by the media. I will never forget Samantha Bee's ridiculous segment on Jill Stein, making fun of her for playing a flute or something, or that hit piece where they sent someone to her house and they were like, she's a, if it's yellow, let it mellow girl, and therefore she's a weird kook because she wants to conserve water and not flush the toilet all the time.
No, Jill's taken a lot of heat for what she's done in her career, but she's so devoted to the movement. And, it's being among, I feel like I'm among the people who share my values And I'm learning from them as I go, Bree, because these are people who've been devoted to the cause forever.
Yeah.
And for me, I feel like, I'm so honored to do this, and I'm sitting here listening to everything that I'm hearing from them, trying to absorb how long, because Dr. West, for example, he's put his body on the line for decades now, representing the same people. And when I say the people who are crushed and oppressed by this horrific system that we have. So I'm learning from it, and I'm growing with it. And I'm asking everyone, please look at him, look at what he represents, and look, how else are we going to do this, Bree, if we keep doing the red, blue?
Yeah.
And if we keep trying to knock down anybody who's challenging red, blue, we're never going to get out of this mess.
Well,
Whatever
speaking of,
happens.
yeah, I'm sorry.
Go. I'm just going to say, whatever happens with this
Yeah.
campaign, I'm sorry, just to finish the thought, excuse me. I'm sorry. Whatever happens with this campaign, at the very least, it's going to be one of the greatest threats to the establishment's dominance and control and oppression that we've seen in decades and generations. So it's very important what Dr. West is doing. And at every level, I want to make sure that I represent him in the most, with the maximum integrity, honesty, and transparency.
Well, speaking of the power of a third party campaign, I mean, at this point, you mentioned that you would have liked Marianne Williamson to do a dirty break and run independent. RFK Jr. is talking about flirting with that idea. At this point, though, do you think that would be a strategic loss for Cornel West to now be splitting the independent vote with all those other candidates?
I don't see it that way, and I don't believe he does. I don't want to speak for him. He can be asked this question and respond. But the way I see it is true democracy is more choices. And it cannot hurt us as a people and as a world to have true freedom of choice and to have many options. Dr. West represents something that none of those other candidates do and has proven it over his career. So I'm very confident that, and I think it's going to be a different election. There will be potentially independents, and I don't know if it's going to be Biden and Trump or either of them. Mm-hmm. So I've always said this is going to throw people for loops this election. The one thing that's not going to be throwing anyone for a loop is that this campaign is going to be steady. We're going to grow. We're going to build a movement. We're going to connect with people. And we're going to speak for and to the people who need it the most, who are voiceless, who are oppressed, and who are downtrodden by the system, rather than speaking to, the oligarchs and the rich, and, which is what really the thing is with the duopoly candidates, they'll do their lip service and, we're the most progressive this, progressive that, or we're the most conservative this, or compassionate conservative, all these terms, these focus group terms. But fundamentally, when they govern for the oligarchs, and they govern against the working class and the poor and the people. 25%, this statistic, I keep repeating it everywhere I go. It's just astounding. 25% of American adults are going hungry sometimes. Not all the time, they're going hungry, do not have enough money to pay for food to eat, let alone the millions without health care. Millions of people cannot afford health care, cannot get health coverage, go bankrupt, and have to crowdfund health care costs. That is unacceptable. And it will not change until we challenge the system and take down the system. It's not going to change just if, vote for the blue because it's a little bit better. We tried that. When does that end?
Yeah. I was surprised, frankly, during my recent exchange with Crystal and Kyle on their podcast, given that they have been so vocally supportive of Marianne, that they seem to think it would be preferable for Cornel West to be running in a primary. It seems to me that as someone who likes them both, this is kind of an ideal situation. Less ideal insofar as obviously I'm sure Marianne wishes she would win the primary. And if she won the primary, then she would be head to head with Cornel. But, things looking like they're looking, it does feel as a voter to be an ideal situation to be able to register one's support or one's opposition to the Democratic Party and Joe Biden by voting for a progressive.
Right, one election, then another.
Right. And then to still have someone in the fight going into the general. My last question for you, Peter. Sure. You are a music man. Many people probably don't know that you are a jazz pianist. Would you characterize yourself as such? Yes. And I wonder, do you talk to Cornel West, another music man, aficionado, if you will, about music?
The answer is a hearty yes. I mean, we have probably the foundation of our conversations is jazz. Every reference is a John Coltrane or a Miles Davis reference or some sort of thing about the rhythm, the blues, the nuance. The thing about Dr. West, he's an improviser. Seeing him speak in person, he stepped up to the microphone at this march against fossil fuels, and instantaneously I saw a jazz musician. That's what he is, right? The cadence, the improvisation, the ability to take a phrase and turn it and improvise on it in so many different ways.
Strange fruit is the blues, that's catastrophe. The problem of our politicians, they think ecological catastrophe is just a problem because they have managerial mentalities, something that they can get their hands around and come up with some incremental response as if we're not living on the edge of the cliff. This is catastrophe. This is the blues all the way down. But we all are blues men and blues women because the response of catastrophe is to never allow it to have the last word. We have solidarity in the face of catastrophe. Let us march together. Let us fight together. Let us laugh together. Let us dance together. Let us smile together. Let us cry together. From our indigenous people all across the country and the world, yes, we will not allow the organized greed to have the last word. Love supreme or love supreme.
As a jazz musician, a jazz lover as well, like me, this is like a dream breed. And so, yeah, our conversations, jazz probably enters pretty much 90% of our conversations because it's our grounding, it's our foundation, because the great jazz artist created an entire language. It's America's greatest art form, jazz. It is really foundational to who we are as a people.
I want to ask you then to recommend an outro music for us today for this episode.
An outro music?
An outro song, yeah. It can be one of your own works if you want, if you send us an MP3.
No, it's okay. No, it's okay. I think, just in line with Dr. West, I think John Coltrane, The Love Supreme, would probably be the most appropriate because he speaks of the Love Supreme so much in his conversation. So yeah, Love Supreme, John Coltrane.
All right, A Love Supreme. Thank you so much for joining us today, Peter Daou. This has been very clarifying, and I appreciate you spending the time.
Thank you, Bree, so much. Thanks for having me.
Where can people find more from you and support the campaign?
Okay, you have to go to CornelWest2024.com, sign up to volunteer, donate. We need everybody to participate. So anything you want to do, come to the website, talk to us, connect with us. And we're going to be out there, though. Dr. West is going to be, everywhere. Picket lines, protests, marches. He's going to be out there more than other candidates and representing the people that other candidates are not going to do. So yeah, we'll be out there. But come to the website, sign up, donate, volunteer, whatever you can do to help. We appreciate it. All
right. Thanks again, Peter. Thank you to the audience, as always, for listening. Welcome to all of the new subscribers that came over post Crystal and Kyle interview. It's great to have you. Your support is appreciated. For those who are not yet subscribers, know that you can get an additional episode every week on Mondays by subscribing at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. I hope you enjoyed this free episode. Take care of yourselves. And as always, keep the faith. Hey, YouTube. Thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.